I'm Jessica Thompson, 29 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've been wearing the uniform of the United States Army with pride. My friends call me Jess, my fellow soldiers call me Sergeant Thompson, and until last Wednesday, my family called me their protector. That all changed with a single video call that shattered everything I thought I knew about loyalty, family, and home. Picture this: you're sitting in a military barracks in Kuwait, stand still in your boots from the day's patrol, when your phone buzzes with a video call from your stepfather. You answer expecting the usual check-in about mom's health or your siblings' latest drama. Instead, you hear these words: "Jess, don't stress about those house payments anymore. We found a cash buyer and closed yesterday for $195,000. Mark here, and I handled everything while you were busy saving the world." My blood didn't just run cold, it froze solid. Mark Rodriguez, my mother's husband of 3 years, had just told me they'd sold our family home on Maple Street. The same house where I took my first steps, where Dad taught me to ride a bike, where Mom held me while I cried over my first heartbreak. But here's the part that made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped my phone. That house at 847 Maple Street wasn't just our childhood home. It was the property I'd been secretly working to buy back from the bank after Mom's devastating foreclosure 3 years ago. But Mark had no idea what I'd really been doing with my deployment money, my combat pay, my every spare dollar for the past 18 months. While he thought I was just another soldier sending money home to help the family, I was executing a plan so bold, so comprehensive, that even I sometimes couldn't believe I was pulling it off. Because while they were selling our childhood home for $195,000 to some stranger named Paul Henderson, I had just finished purchasing the entire Maple Street neighborhood block for $2.8 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how we got here requires knowing who I was before I became the woman who could buy an entire neighborhood while serving our country overseas. Growing up in Riverside, Ohio, our house on Maple Street was more than just an address, it was the heartbeat of everything good in my world. Riverside sits about 30 minutes outside Columbus, one of those towns where everyone knows your name and your business, where Friday night football games bring out half the population, and where military families like ours formed the backbone of the community. Our neighborhood, the Maple Street District as the locals called it, was filled with modest ranch homes built in the 80s, each with their own personality expressed through different colored shutters, varying fence styles, and gardens that reflected their owners' dreams. Our house, 847 Maple Street, was a 3-bedroom ranch with blue shutters that Dad painted every 2 years like clockwork. Mom, Linda Thompson, had spent countless weekends creating what she called her little slice of paradise in our backyard: flower beds bursting with marigolds and petunias, a vegetable garden that supplied our dinner table from May through September, and a wooden swing set that Dad built by hand when my younger siblings Tyler and Emma were small. Dad was everything a daughter could want in a father. Robert Thompson worked at the Honda plant in Marysville, coming home each evening with grease under his fingernails and stories that made us laugh until our sides hurt. He taught me that hard work wasn't just about earning money, it was about building something lasting, something you could be proud of. Every Saturday morning, Dad and I would work on some project around the house together. Whether we were fixing a leaky faucet, painting the garage, or building new shelves for Mom's books, those mornings taught me that my gender didn't determine my capabilities. Mom worked at First National Bank in downtown Riverside, starting as a teller when Tyler was born and working her way up to assistant branch manager by the time Emma graduated high school. She was the kind of woman who could balance a checkbook in her head, remember every birthday in our extended family, and somehow always have dinner ready when Dad walked through the door. Linda Thompson believed in education, hard work, and the power of saving every penny for the future, lessons that would serve me well in ways she never could have imagined. Tyler, my younger brother, was born when I was 5, and from the moment he arrived, he was the golden boy who could do no wrong in Mom's eyes. Even as a child, Tyler had a way of charming himself out of trouble and into everyone's good graces. He was naturally gifted at sports, particularly baseball, and for years our family calendar revolved around his games and tournaments. While I was the responsible one who helped with homework and chores, Tyler was the one who brought home trophies and made Mom beam with pride. Emma, the baby of our family, arrived when I was 8, and she immediately became my real-life doll. I helped Mom change her diapers, taught her to walk, and later helped her with homework when she struggled with math. Emma was born with a gentle heart and a determination to help people, qualities that eventually led her to pursue nursing school. She looked up to me in a way that both thrilled and terrified me, because I knew that everything I did would influence the woman she would become. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had family dinners every Sunday, game nights during winter months, and annual camping trips to Hocking Hills State Park where Dad would tell ghost stories around the campfire, while Mom worried about bears that never materialized. I learned to drive in the driveway of 847 Maple Street, had my senior photos taken against the backdrop of Mom's flower garden, and brought my prom date to meet my parents in our cozy living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in October when I was 16. Dad was driving home from his shift at the plant when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of his truck. The call came at 8:37 p.m., I remember because I was doing calculus homework at the kitchen table. When the phone rang, Mom answered with her usual cheerful, Thompson residence, and within seconds, her face crumpled in a way that told me our world had just ended. Dad died instantly, they told us later. He wouldn't have suffered, they said. As if that made the crushing weight of his absence any easier to bear. Robert Thompson, who had kissed Mom goodbye that morning and promised to pick up milk on his way home, would never walk through our front door again. The man who taught me that I could build anything I set my mind to was gone, leaving behind a family that had no idea how to function without his steady presence. The months following Dad's death passed in a blur of casseroles from neighbors, insurance paperwork, and the suffocating weight of grief that seemed to press down on our house like a physical force. Mom tried to hold everything together, but I could see the cracks forming. She worked longer hours at the bank, partly because we needed the money and partly because staying busy kept her from falling apart completely. Tyler, who had been Dad's shadow at every baseball game, quit the team and spent most of his time alone in his room. Emma, only 8 years old, kept asking when Daddy was coming home, breaking our hearts a little more each time. I became the glue that held our family together, though I was barely holding myself together. I cooked dinner when Mom worked late, helped Tyler and Emma with homework, and somehow managed to keep my grades up while grieving the loss of the most important man in my life. Friends at school tried to relate, but unless you've lost a parent, you can't understand the way it reshapes everything you thought you knew about safety and permanence. The financial pressure was enormous, though Mom tried to shield us from the worst of it. Dad's life insurance helped, but it wasn't enough to replace his income indefinitely. Mom picked up every overtime shift available at the bank, and I got a part-time job at the local grocery store, lying about my age to start working at 15. Every dollar I earned went toward helping Mom pay the mortgage, buy groceries, and keep our utilities on. Despite the financial strain, Mom was determined to keep us in our house. "This is where your father's love lives," she would say when the bills piled up and the stress showed on her face. "We're not giving that up without a fight." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I understood even then that she wasn't just talking about preserving a building, she was trying to maintain the last physical connection we had to the life Dad had built for us. High school became a balancing act between academic achievement, family responsibilities, and the part-time job that helped keep food on our table. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside during my junior year to discuss college plans. "Jessica, your grades are excellent, but I'm concerned about your family's financial situation. Have you considered military service? The Army has excellent programs for students like you." The idea of joining the military had never occurred to me, but as Mrs. Patterson explained the benefits, college tuition assistance, steady income, training in valuable skills, and the opportunity to serve something bigger than myself, I began to see it as more than just a way to escape our financial struggles. The military could provide me with the tools and resources to build a better future for myself and my family. That night, I brought up the possibility with Mom while we cleaned up after dinner. She stopped washing dishes and turned to look at me with a mixture of pride and fear. "Jess, your father would be so proud of you for wanting to serve our country," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you're my baby girl, and the thought of you in danger terrifies me." We talked late into the night about the pros and cons, the risks and opportunities. Mom worried about my safety, Tyler thought it was pretty cool that his sister might become a soldier, and Emma cried because she thought it meant I would never come home again. After weeks of research, conversations with military recruiters, and long discussions with Mom, I made my decision. I would enlist in the Army after graduation, with the goal of serving my country while building the financial foundation our family desperately needed. Senior year passed quickly, filled with the usual milestones, prom, graduation parties, college acceptance letters that I couldn't afford to accept, but underneath it all was the knowledge that my life was about to change dramatically. I spent extra time with Emma, teaching her things I thought she'd need to know while I was away. I tried to mentor Tyler, hoping to instill some of Dad's work ethic and responsibility, though he seemed more interested in video games than life lessons. 3 weeks after graduation, I shipped out to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. The day I left Riverside was one of the hardest of my life. Mom cried as she hugged me goodbye, Tyler awkwardly punched my arm and told me to kick some butt. And Emma wrapped her small arms around my waist and made me promise to write letters every week. Basic training was everything the recruiters said it would be and nothing like I expected. The physical challenges were demanding but manageable. Years of helping Dad with home improvement projects had given me a practical strength that many of my fellow recruits lacked. The mental challenges were harder, learning to follow orders without question, adapting to military hierarchy, and pushing through moments when I wanted nothing more than to quit and go home to the familiar comfort of Maple Street. But I persevered, driven by the knowledge that my family was counting on me and by a growing sense of pride in wearing the uniform. I discovered that I had natural leadership abilities and a talent for logistics that my drill sergeants noticed and encouraged. By the time I graduated from basic training, I had found my place in the military structure and earned the respect of my peers and superiors. My first assignment was to Fort Carson in Colorado, where I would serve as a logistics specialist with the 4th Infantry Division. Colorado was beautiful but alien to someone who had grown up in the flat farmlands of Ohio. The mountains were breathtaking, the altitude took some getting used to, and the culture was different from the small town Midwest values I'd known all my life. I threw myself into military life with the same determination I'd applied to everything else. I excelled in my training programs, volunteered for additional responsibilities, and began the slow process of building a career that could support my family's needs. Every month, I sent money home, sometimes as much as half my paycheck, to help Mom with the mortgage, Tyler's expenses, and Emma's school needs. During my first leave back home, I could see the strain that my absence and Dad's death had put on our family. Mom had aged years in the months I'd been gone, working double shifts to make ends meet. Tyler had grown taller but seemed to have lost direction, spending his days playing video games and hanging out with friends who had no ambition beyond high school. Emma had grown up quickly in my absence, taking on household responsibilities that should have been Tyler's. The house itself showed signs of deferred maintenance, peeling paint on the shutters Dad used to refresh religiously, Mom's garden looking sparse because she didn't have time to tend it properly, and small repairs going undone because there was no money to hire professionals and no one in the family had Dad's skills. That's when I realized that sending money home wasn't enough. Our family needed more than financial support, they needed someone with the vision and determination to secure their future in a way that would honor Dad's memory and Mom's sacrifices. I began to formulate a plan that would take years to execute but could ultimately provide the security and stability our family deserved. Back at Fort Carson, I started researching investment strategies, real estate markets in Ohio, and military benefits that could be leveraged for long-term financial growth. I discovered that military personnel had access to VA loans with favorable terms, that deployment pay was tax-free and could be saved at higher rates than civilian income, and that there were investment programs specifically designed for service members. I also learned about the real estate market in Riverside and the broader Columbus area. Property values were depressed due to the economic downturn, but the fundamentals were sound: good schools, stable employment base, and proximity to major metropolitan areas. For someone with patience and capital, it was an ideal time to invest in residential real estate. During my second year at Fort Carson, I was selected for deployment to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. The news filled me with a mixture of pride and anxiety: pride at being chosen for this important mission, anxiety about the dangers I would face and the extended separation from my family. But deployment also meant combat pay, hazard pay, and tax-free income that could accelerate my investment timeline significantly. I spent weeks preparing for deployment, both militarily and financially. I researched investment advisors who specialized in working with military personnel, opened high-yield savings accounts that would maximize my deployment earnings, and began studying the Riverside real estate market with the intensity one once applied to calculus homework. The week before I deployed, I made a trip home to Riverside that would prove to be more significant than I realized at the time. Mom had been struggling with medical issues, nothing life-threatening, but expensive nonetheless, and the financial pressure was showing on her face and in her voice. Tyler was supposed to start community college in the fall, but the tuition money wasn't there. Emma was excelling in school but needed resources for extracurricular activities that might help her get scholarships later. As I walked through our house on Maple Street, I made a promise to myself and to Dad's memory: I would find a way to secure our family's future, to ensure that Mom never had to worry about losing the home where Dad's love still lived in every room. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I was determined to make it happen. That promise would guide every decision I made over the next several years, leading me down a path that would ultimately put me in position to buy not just our family home, but an entire neighborhood. But first, I had to survive a year in Afghanistan. save every possible dollar, and begin building the network of contacts and knowledge that would make my ambitious plan possible. Little did I know that while I was serving overseas, trying to save our family's future, the people I loved most would make decisions that would threaten everything I was working to protect. The betrayal was still years away, but the seeds were already being planted in the fertile ground of financial desperation and misplaced priorities. As my plane lifted off from Colorado Springs, bound for Afghanistan, I looked out the window at the mountains below and whispered a prayer that had become my daily ritual. Dad, help me be strong enough to protect what you built. Help me find a way to bring our family home. I had no idea that bringing our family home would eventually require me to buy the entire neighborhood, or that the biggest threat to our security wouldn't come from foreign enemies but from the people who were supposed to love and support me. But that's a story for the next part of this journey, the part where I learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in your own backyard, against people who should have been your allies. Afghanistan hit me like a wall of heat and dust that never settled. Bagram Airfield became my home for the next 12 months, a sprawling military complex surrounded by mountains that looked beautiful from a distance but reminded you every day that you were very far from Ohio. The first thing that struck me wasn't the danger or the foreign landscape, it was the complete disconnect from everything I'd known as normal life. My role as a logistics specialist meant coordinating supply chains, managing inventory, and ensuring that our forward operating bases had everything they needed to function. It was detail-oriented work that required precision and planning skills that would serve me well in ways I couldn't have imagined at the time. Every day, I dealt with budgets, resource allocation, and strategic planning on a scale that dwarfed anything I'd encountered in civilian life. The work was demanding, but it was during my off-duty hours that I began to seriously educate myself about real estate investment and financial planning. The base had a surprisingly good internet connection, and I spent countless evenings researching property markets, studying investment strategies, and learning about the unique financial opportunities available to military personnel. I discovered that deployment income was tax-free, which meant that every dollar I saved had significantly more purchasing power than civilian earnings. Combat pay, hazard pay, and family separation allowances added up to a substantial monthly income that I could save almost entirely, since my basic needs were covered by the military. For the first time in my adult life, I had both significant earning potential and minimal expenses. Through online forums and military financial websites, I connected with other service members who were using their deployment time to build wealth. Through real estate investment, I learned about a financial advisor named Monica Chen who specialized in working with military clients, helping them leverage VA loans and deployment savings to build property portfolios. Monica and I began communicating via email and secure video calls. She was based in Columbus, which meant she understood the Ohio real estate market intimately. More importantly, she had helped dozens of military families build wealth through strategic property investment, using the unique advantages that came with military service. During our first consultation call, I explained my goal. I wanted to eventually buy back our family home on Maple Street, which Mom was struggling to keep despite working double shifts at the bank. Monica listened carefully, then asked questions that revealed the scope of what might be possible. Jessica, what if instead of just buying back your family home, we created a strategy that would secure your entire family's financial future? She asked during one of our evening calls. With your deployment income, VA loan eligibility, and the current state of the Riverside real estate market, you could potentially build a portfolio that would generate passive income for decades. She explained how the 2008 financial crisis had depressed property values throughout Ohio, creating opportunities for investors with patience and capital. Many homeowners were facing foreclosure, and properties were selling for 30 to 40% below their pre-crisis values. For someone with access to military lending programs and deployment savings, it was an ideal time to enter the real estate market. Monica proposed a three-phase strategy that was more ambitious than anything I'd considered. Phase 1 involved purchasing a single rental property in Riverside using a VA loan, which required no down payment and offered favorable interest rates. Phase 2 would use the equity from that property, combined with additional deployment savings, to acquire more properties in the same neighborhood. Phase 3 would eventually include commercial properties and larger residential developments. The plan was aggressive, but Monica had run the numbers based on my deployment income, projected savings rate, and the current Riverside market conditions. If everything went according to plan, I could own multiple properties in my hometown within 5 years, generating enough rental income to support my family and build long-term wealth. I spent weeks studying every aspect of the plan, researching comparable sales, rental rates, and neighborhood trends in Riverside. The Maple Street district where I'd grown up was particularly attractive because it was populated primarily by working-class families, many with military connections. The area had good schools, low crime rates, and stable demand for rental housing. More importantly, I began to understand something that would prove crucial later. By concentrating my investments in a single neighborhood, I could eventually influence its development and character. Instead of being scattered across multiple markets, my properties would form a cohesive portfolio that could be managed strategically. I also started learning about property management, tenant relations, and the legal aspects of real estate ownership. Every spare moment was devoted to education, reading books about real estate investment, studying Ohio landlord-tenant law, and learning about property maintenance and renovation. The work was intense, but it gave me something to focus on besides the daily stress and occasional danger of deployment. While my fellow soldiers spent their free time playing video games or watching movies, I was building a foundation for my family's financial future. 3 months into my deployment, I was ready to make my first property purchase. Monica had identified a 3-bedroom ranch house on Oak Street, just 2 blocks from our family home on Maple Street. The house had been foreclosed and was being sold by the bank for $68,000, approximately half of what it would have been worth before the financial crisis. The property needed work, new carpet, fresh paint, and some minor plumbing repairs, but the structure was sound and the neighborhood was stable. More importantly, it could rent for $900 per month, providing positive cash flow after mortgage payments, taxes, and insurance. Making the purchase from Afghanistan required careful coordination. Monica served as my representative, handling inspections and paperwork while I provided electronic signatures and wire transfers from my deployment location. The entire process took 6 weeks, during which I anxiously monitored every detail via email and video calls. When Monica sent me the photos of my first investment property with the keys in her hand, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that rivaled anything I'd experienced in my military career. I owned real estate. I was building wealth. I was taking concrete steps toward securing my family's future. But more than the financial accomplishment, owning that house on Oak Street represented something deeper. I was claiming a stake in my hometown, establishing roots that would outlast my military service. Every mortgage payment was an investment in the community where I'd grown up, where my father was buried, where my family still lived. My second deployment, this time to Kuwait, began 18 months later with a much clearer sense of purpose. I now own 2 rental properties in Riverside. The original house on Oak Street had been joined by a duplex on Pine Avenue, and was generating enough rental income to cover both mortgages with money left over for repairs and improvements. Monica and I had refined our strategy during my time back at Fort Carson. Instead of random property acquisitions, we were now focused specifically on the Maple Street district, building a concentrated portfolio that would give me significant influence over the neighborhood's development. The plan was working better than either of us had projected. Property values in Riverside were beginning to recover from their post-crisis lows, but there were still deals available for investors with ready capital and quick decision-making capabilities. My military income, combined with rental income from existing properties, provided the financial foundation for increasingly ambitious purchases. During this second deployment, I acquired 4 additional properties, bringing my total to 6 rental units in a 4-block radius around our family home. Each purchase was carefully analyzed for rental potential, long-term appreciation prospects, and strategic value within the larger portfolio. But I wasn't just collecting properties randomly. Through careful research and patient planning, I was pursuing a specific goal that I hadn't shared with anyone, including Monica. I was systematically acquiring properties that surrounded our family home on Maple Street, creating a buffer zone that would protect our neighborhood from unwanted development. I'd learned that several out-of-state investors were beginning to show interest in Riverside, attracted by the low property prices and proximity to Columbus. Some of these investors had reputations for buying affordable housing, converting it to luxury rentals, and displacing long-term residents who couldn't afford the higher rents. By owning multiple properties in our neighborhood, I could influence who lived there, what kinds of renovations were done, and how the character of the area evolved. It was a way of protecting not just our family home, but the entire community where I'd grown up. The strategy required patience and significant capital, but it was working. Each property I acquired removed it from the market, preventing potentially problematic investors from gaining a foothold in our neighborhood. Each renovation I completed improved the area's overall appeal while maintaining its character as affordable housing for working families. Monica was impressed by the scope of what we were accomplishing, but I sensed she didn't fully understand my ultimate goal. She saw a smart investment strategy that was building wealth efficiently. I saw something more, a way to honor my father's Memory by protecting the community he'd loved, while securing my family's financial future in the process. Communication with my family during this deployment was more frequent but somehow more distant. Technology had improved, allowing for regular video calls and instant messaging, but the conversations felt strained in ways I couldn't quite identify. Mom seemed tired during our calls, though she insisted everything was fine. Tyler had started community college but was struggling academically, more interested in social activities than coursework. Emma was thriving in high school, but I could see the stress of being the only responsible sibling at home wearing on her. Most concerning was the appearance of Mark Rodriguez in our family video calls. Mom had mentioned she was dating someone, but seeing this unfamiliar man in our kitchen, sitting at the table where Dad used to read the newspaper, felt like a violation of something sacred. Mark seemed pleasant enough, a construction foreman who had been divorced for several years before meeting Mom. He was clearly trying to make a good impression during our video calls, asking about my deployment and expressing support for my military service. But there was something about his presence in our family space that made me uncomfortable. Tyler seemed to like Mark, appreciating having an adult male figure around the house. Emma was more reserved, polite but distant in the way that teenagers often are with their parents' romantic partners. Mom appeared happier than she'd been since Dad's death, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was changing in our family dynamic. During one particularly difficult call, Mom mentioned that they were struggling with some unexpected expenses, car repairs, medical bills, and home maintenance issues that seemed to pile up all at once. I immediately offered to send additional money, but Mom insisted they could handle it. "You're already doing so much for us, Jess," she said, her voice carrying a weariness that worried me. "We don't want to be a burden on your military career." What she didn't know was that my real estate investments were now generating enough passive income to cover most of their expenses without touching my military pay. But I decided to keep my investment activities private until I could surprise them with something concrete, ideally, the deed to our family home, purchased back from the bank and given to Mom as a gift. This decision to maintain secrecy about my real estate activities would later prove to be a critical mistake, but at the time it felt like the right approach. I wanted to surprise my family with financial security, not burden them with details about investment strategies they might not understand or approve of. Meanwhile, my relationship with Monica had evolved into something approaching friendship. She understood my military schedule, respected my long-term goals, and had proven herself trustworthy with significant financial decisions. Our weekly strategy calls had become a highlight of my deployment routine. "Jessica, what you're building in Riverside is remarkable," Monica told me during one of our planning sessions. "You're not just investing in real estate, you're investing in community stability. That kind of concentrated portfolio can have real impact on a neighborhood's development." She was right, though she didn't know the full extent of my plans. By the end of my second deployment, I would own 9 properties in the Maple Street district, making me one of the largest small-scale landlords in that part of Riverside. More importantly, I was beginning to understand how real estate ownership could be used as a tool for community development and family protection. My leave time between deployments provided the first opportunity to see my investment properties in person and spend extended time with my family. The reunion was emotional. Emma had grown into a confident teenager, Tyler had filled out and looked more like Dad every day, and Mom seemed genuinely happy for the first time since Dad's death. But it was also during this leave that I began to notice the subtle changes in our family dynamic that would eventually lead to the crisis that shattered everything. Mark Rodriguez had become a permanent fixture in our household, though he and Mom weren't officially living together. He spent most evenings at our house, helped with household repairs, and had clearly assumed a paternal role with Tyler and Emma. While I appreciated his practical help, I struggled with seeing another man in Dad's space. The tension wasn't openly acknowledged, but it was present in small moments. Mark using Dad's favorite coffee mug, rearranging tools in the garage where Dad used to work on projects, expressing opinions about family decisions that I felt should be Mom's to make. He was never disrespectful or presumptuous, but his growing influence in our family was undeniable. Tyler had embraced Mark's presence wholeheartedly. At 24, Tyler was still struggling to find direction in his life, and Mark's attention and guidance seemed to fill a void that had existed since Dad's death. They worked on projects together, watched sports, and shared an easy camaraderie that I couldn't help but envy. Emma's relationship with Mark was more complicated. She was polite and respectful, but I could see the same protective instincts toward Dad's memory that I felt. She never openly criticized Mark, but she also never fully embraced him the way Tyler had. Mom's happiness was the most complex part of the situation. She deserved love and companionship after years of struggle and loneliness. Mark clearly cared for her and treated her well. But seeing her with someone else still felt like a betrayal of Dad's memory, even though I knew that was unfair. The real tension emerged around discussions of the house and family finances. Mark had strong opinions about what he called practical matters, selling the house and buying something smaller and more manageable, using life insurance money for immediate needs rather than long-term investments, focusing on present financial stability rather than future security. During family dinners, I found myself defending decisions that I couldn't fully explain without revealing my real estate activities. When Mark suggested that Mom should consider selling the house and moving into a more affordable apartment, I argued passionately against it without being able to explain that I was working toward buying the house back. Jess, I understand this house has sentimental value, Mark said during one particularly tense conversation. But your mother is working herself to death trying to keep up with mortgage payments, maintenance costs, and property taxes. Sometimes, the practical choice is the right choice, even if it's not the emotional choice. His logic was sound, but it missed the deeper significance of what I was trying to accomplish. The house wasn't just a financial burden, it was the physical embodiment of Dad's legacy and our family's history. Selling it would mean admitting defeat, giving up on the dreams and sacrifices that Dad had made to provide us with stability. But I couldn't explain my perspective without revealing that I had the financial means to solve our housing problems, which would require explaining my entire real estate investment strategy. I wasn't ready to do that, partly because the plan wasn't complete and partly because I wanted the eventual surprise to be meaningful. This communication breakdown created a pattern of tension that would only worsen over time. My family saw me as sentimental and impractical, clinging to memories, while they struggled with present realities. I saw them as giving up too easily on something precious, not understanding that I was working to preserve what Dad had built. The most painful moment came when I visited our rental properties with Monica. Standing in the house on Oak Street, watching a young military family move into their new home, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. These weren't just investment properties, they were quality housing for people who needed it, maintained to standards that respected both tenants and neighbors. "You've done something really special here, Jessica," Monica said as we reviewed the portfolio's performance. 9 properties, all profitable, all improving the neighborhood. "Your father would be proud of what you've built." But I couldn't share that pride with my family, because they didn't know what I'd built. The secrecy that had seemed wise and romantic, surprising them with financial security, now felt like a barrier that prevented them from understanding my choices and priorities. When I returned to Fort Carson for training before my next deployment, the family goodbye felt different. There was love and affection, but also underlying tension about unresolved issues. Mark shook my hand and thanked me for my service, but I could see in his eyes that he considered me an obstacle to practical family decisions. Mom hugged me tightly and whispered, "I wish you could understand that we're just trying to do what's best for everyone." Tyler gave me his usual awkward hug and promised to work harder in school. Emma cried, as she always did, but her tears seemed heavier this time. As my plane lifted off from Columbus, headed back to Colorado, I made a decision that would have enormous consequences. Instead of continuing to keep my real estate activities secret, I would complete one final phase of property acquisition and then surprise my family with the ultimate gift, ownership of our entire neighborhood block, including the deed to our family home. It was an ambitious plan that required one more deployment, substantial additional investment, and perfect timing. If everything worked according to plan, I would return from Kuwait with enough properties to control the entire Maple Street district, including our family home, which I would purchase from the bank and give to Mom as the surprise of a lifetime. What I didn't anticipate was that my family's financial pressures and Mark's practical influence would lead them to make a decision that would destroy everything I'd worked to build and fundamentally alter our relationships forever. My third deployment to Kuwait began with a sense of urgent purpose that my previous overseas assignments had lacked. I had 18 months to complete the most ambitious phase of my real estate strategy, acquiring enough additional properties to control the entire Maple Street district, including somehow gaining ownership of our family home. Monica and I had spent months developing what we called Operation Homecoming, a comprehensive plan to purchase every available property within a 4-block radius of 847 Maple Street. It was an audacious goal that would require perfect execution, significant financial commitment, and a degree of luck with market timing. The strategy involved 3 different acquisition approaches. First, we would continue purchasing distressed properties through traditional real estate transactions, using my VA loan eligibility and deployment savings. Second, we would begin approaching homeowners directly, offering to purchase their properties at above-market prices for immediate cash sales. Third, and most complexly, we would explore purchasing the outstanding mortgage debt on our family home directly from the bank. This last approach was Monica's idea, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than waiting for the bank to foreclose on Mom's mortgage, we would negotiate to purchase the entire debt obligation. This would make me the mortgage holder, allowing me to restructure the payment terms in whatever way worked best for Mom while ultimately gaining ownership of the property. The plan required substantial capital, more than I had available even with my expanded rental income and deployment savings. Monica suggested bringing in a silent partner, another military family investment group that specialized in exactly this type of neighborhood-focused real estate development. Through Monica's connections, I was introduced to Major Sarah Williams, a career Army officer who had spent 20 years building a real estate portfolio across 3 states. Sarah understood the unique advantages that military personnel had in real estate investment, and she was particularly interested in the community development aspect of what I was trying to accomplish. "Jessica, what you're doing in Riverside isn't just smart investing," Sarah explained during one of our video conference calls. "You're creating a model for how military families can use their service benefits to build generational wealth while strengthening the communities they come from. I'd like to partner with you to make this happen." Sarah's investment group agreed to provide the additional capital needed to complete Operation Homecoming in exchange for a partnership stake in the property portfolio. More importantly, they brought expertise in property management, legal structuring, and long-term development planning that would be crucial for managing such a large portfolio. With this partnership in place, our property acquisition pace accelerated dramatically. During my first 6 months in Kuwait, we purchased 8 additional properties in the Maple Street district, bringing my total ownership to 17 properties in a concentrated 4-block area. Each acquisition was carefully planned and executed. We targeted properties where the owners were facing financial difficulties, offering quick cash sales at fair prices that solved their immediate problems while adding to our portfolio. We also purchased several properties that had been converted to rental units by absentee landlords, allowing us to improve the properties and provide better housing for tenants. The most satisfying acquisitions were the houses where I could provide housing for military families. Several of my tenants were Army wives whose husbands were deployed, and being able to offer them quality, affordable housing in a safe neighborhood felt like an extension of my military service. But the most important acquisition was still pending: our family home at 847 Maple Street. Negotiating with First National Bank, where Mom worked, required delicate handling to avoid creating conflicts of interest or alerting my family to what I was planning. Monica worked directly with the bank's loan department, representing herself as an investor interested in purchasing distressed mortgages. The process took months of negotiations, credit checks, and legal documentation, but eventually we reached an agreement that would allow me to purchase Mom's mortgage debt for approximately $180,000, less than the house's current market value but enough to satisfy the bank's requirements. The arrangement was structured so that I would become the mortgage holder, with Mom continuing to make payments directly to my investment company. From her perspective, nothing would change except that her mortgage was now held by a private investor instead of the bank. Eventually, I planned to surprise her by forgiving the remaining debt and transferring the deed into her name as a gift. As Operation Homecoming neared completion, I owned or controlled 23 properties in the Maple Street district, making me the largest property owner in that section of Riverside. My family was actively planning to sell our home, and they were doing it based on a complete misunderstanding of our financial situation. If they knew about my real estate portfolio, about the mortgage I was about to purchase, about the passive income that could solve all their money problems, they would never consider selling. But I had chosen to keep my investments secret, planning a dramatic reveal that now seemed foolishly naive. While I had been building an empire designed to protect them, they had been struggling with problems I could have solved months ago. I immediately called Monica, despite the late hour in Ohio, and explained what I'd overheard. Her response was characteristically direct and practical. "Jessica, you need to tell them what you've been doing," she said without hesitation. "I understand you wanted this to be a surprise, but surprises only work when the timing is right. If they sell that house before you can complete the mortgage purchase, all your planning becomes irrelevant." Monica was right, but the thought of revealing my secret felt like admitting failure. The surprise had been more than just a gift, it had been proof that I could solve our family's problems through my own effort and planning. Revealing it prematurely felt like asking for credit for an incomplete project. "What if I just accelerate the timeline?" I asked. "Could we complete the mortgage purchase in the next week instead of waiting 3 more weeks?" Monica sighed, and I could practically hear her shaking her head. "The bank paperwork alone takes 2 weeks minimum. Plus, we're dealing with a mortgage held by the bank where your mother works, which adds complexity to the legal documentation. Even if we rush everything, we're looking at 10 days minimum. 10 days might be too long if Mark was pushing for an immediate sale." From what I'd overheard, this wasn't a new conversation, and it sounded like Mom was closer to agreeing than I'd realized. I spent the rest of that evening drafting and deleting emails to my family, trying to find the right words to explain what I'd been doing without sounding like I was criticizing their decision-making or trying to control their lives from halfway around the world. Every draft sounded either condescending or desperate, and I finally gave up and decided to wait until our next scheduled video call. That call came 2 days later, and it was immediately clear that the family dynamics had shifted since our last conversation. Mom looked exhausted, Tyler seemed energized in a way that suggested big decisions were being made, and Mark was more present in the conversation than usual, offering opinions and asking questions about my deployment schedule. "Jess, we need to talk to you about some family business," Mom began, her voice carrying the formal tone she used when delivering difficult news. "Mark and Tyler have been helping me look at our financial situation, and we've realized that some changes need to be made." I felt my stomach drop, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What kind of changes, Mom?" Mark leaned into the frame, his expression serious but not unkind. "Jessica, your mother has been working herself to death trying to keep up with the mortgage on this house. Between the payments, property taxes, maintenance costs, and utilities, she's spending almost 70% of her income just on housing. That's not sustainable. We found a buyer," Tyler added, barely able to contain his excitement. "A guy named Paul Henderson who does property development. He's offering $195,000 cash, which would pay off the mortgage completely and leave Mom with almost $50,000 to start fresh." The name Paul Henderson meant nothing to me at the time, but it would later prove to be crucial. For now, I was focused on the magnitude of what they were telling me. They weren't just considering selling the house, they had already found a buyer and were presenting this as a done deal. "Wait," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Have you actually agreed to sell, or are you just exploring options?" Mom's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "We haven't signed anything yet, but Paul seems very serious, and his offer is more than fair. He's willing to close quickly, which would solve our immediate problems." "What kind of problems?" I pressed. "I send money home every month. Are there expenses I don't know about?" Mark and Mom exchanged a look that suggested they discussed how much to tell me. Finally, Mom spoke up. "There have been some unexpected costs. My car needed major repairs, the roof has been leaking, and Tyler had some medical bills from an emergency room visit. Plus, Emma's nursing school costs are higher than we anticipated." Each item on her list was a problem that could have been easily solved with the rental income from my property portfolio, but I couldn't say that without revealing everything. I found myself in the impossible position of watching my family struggle with problems I could solve, while being unable to explain why they didn't need to sell our home. "Mom, before you make any final decisions, could you give me a week to look into some options?" I asked, hoping to buy time for Monica to accelerate the mortgage purchase process. "I might be able to help more than you realize." Tyler jumped in before Mom could respond. "Jess, we appreciate everything you do for us, but this isn't something money can solve. Mom needs a fresh start, somewhere that doesn't remind her of Dad's death every day, somewhere she can actually afford to maintain." The comment about Dad's death stung, because it revealed how differently we viewed the house's significance. For me, the house was a living memorial to Dad's love and sacrifice. For Tyler, it was apparently a painful reminder of loss that was holding Mom back from moving forward. Mark nodded in agreement with Tyler. More importantly, I had created something unique, a concentrated real estate portfolio that could influence neighborhood development while providing quality housing for working families. The financial returns were excellent. Rental income from the portfolio was generating enough monthly cash flow to cover all mortgage payments, property taxes, and maintenance costs, with substantial profits remaining for reinvestment. Property values in the area were beginning to appreciate as our renovations and improvements enhanced the neighborhood's appeal. But beyond the financial success, I had created something that honored Dad's memory and protected the community where our family had built their life. Every property I owned was maintained to high standards, rented to responsible tenants, and managed with respect for both the tenants and the surrounding neighbors. However, success brought unexpected challenges. Managing such a large property portfolio from a deployment location required constant communication with Monica, our property management company, and various contractors handling maintenance and improvements. My daily routine included early morning calls to Ohio before my military duties began, and evening sessions reviewing rental applications, maintenance requests, and financial reports. The workload was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. I was building something significant, creating value that would last for generations, and proving that military service could be leveraged to achieve extraordinary financial and community goals. Communication with my family during this deployment became increasingly strained, though they didn't know why. From their perspective, I seemed distracted and distant during our video calls, more interested in asking about neighborhood developments than discussing family issues. They couldn't understand that every piece of information about our area, new businesses, road improvements, other families moving in or out, was relevant to managing my property portfolio. Mom's financial stress was becoming more apparent during our calls. She looked tired, and I could see the weight of working double shifts to keep up with mortgage payments and household expenses. Tyler had dropped out of community college again, adding to her financial burden. Emma was excelling in her nursing program, but her education costs were straining the family budget. Mark's presence in our family video calls had become routine, and his influence on family decisions was increasingly apparent. He had strong opinions about practical matters, and I could see that Mom was beginning to rely on his advice about financial decisions. During one particularly difficult call, Mark suggested that the family should consider selling the house and buying something more affordable. "Linda, you're working yourself to death trying to keep up with this mortgage," he said, looking directly at the camera. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices for the sake of your health and your future." I wanted to scream that I was 3 weeks away from solving all their financial problems, that I had already purchased the mortgage and was planning to surprise them with the deed. But the surprise was part of the plan, and revealing it prematurely would ruin the impact I'd been working toward for years. Instead, I found myself arguing against selling without being able to explain why, creating tension and misunderstanding that I was powerless to resolve. My family saw me as sentimental and impractical, unwilling to accept reality. I saw them as giving up on Dad's legacy just when I was about to preserve it forever. The miscommunication and growing tension would prove to be the foundation for the betrayal that was about to destroy everything I'd worked to build. While I was executing the final phase of Operation Homecoming, preparing to surprise my family with the ultimate gift of security and independence, they were making plans that would shatter my trust and force me to reveal my hand in the most painful way possible. 3 weeks before I was scheduled to complete the mortgage purchase and surprise Mom with the deed to our family home, Mark Rodriguez would make a phone call that would change everything. But I had no way of knowing that storm was coming, focused as I was on the final details of creating what I thought would be the perfect homecoming surprise. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came through a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Tuesday evening in Kuwait, and I was reviewing rental applications for a duplex on Cedar Avenue when my phone buzzed with what appeared to be an accidental video call from Tyler's phone. The call connected before I could decline it, and instead of hanging up immediately, I found myself looking at our kitchen table from an odd angle, as if the phone had been left propped against something. Tyler wasn't visible in the frame, but I could hear voices coming from the living room. Mom, Mark, and what sounded like Tyler were having an intense discussion about finances, and their voices carried clearly to wherever the phone had been abandoned. What I heard in the next 15 minutes would haunt me for weeks. "Linda, we need to face reality here," Mark was saying, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who had made this argument before. "You're working 60-hour weeks just to keep up with the mortgage payments, and that's not sustainable. Your health is suffering, Tyler needs direction, and Emma's nursing school costs are only going to increase." Mom's voice was tired, strained in a way that made my chest tighten with guilt and worry. "I know you're right, Mark, but this house is all we have left of Robert. It's where the kids grew up, where all our memories are. I can't just throw that away." "Nobody's asking you to throw anything away," Mark replied, and I could hear him moving around, probably pacing the way he did when he was trying to solve a problem. "But keeping those memories doesn't require bankrupting yourself. We could find a nice apartment, maybe a small condo, something manageable that would free up money for the kids' education and your retirement." Tyler's voice joined the conversation, and hearing him support Mark's position felt like a physical blow. "Mom, Mark's right. You're killing yourself trying to keep this place. And honestly, Jess isn't even here most of the time. She sends money when she can, but she's got her own life in the army. We can't base our decisions on what she might want. Jessica sacrifices a lot for this family," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "She's serving our country, and she sends home money every month to help us." "I'm not criticizing Jess," Tyler continued, "but she's been gone for 3 years, and who knows how much longer she'll be deployed. We have to make decisions based on what's best for the people who are actually here." Mark's voice became more persuasive, taking on the tone of someone presenting a well-rehearsed argument. "I've been looking at the numbers, Linda. If we sell this house, we could pay off all your debts, put money aside for Emma's education, and still have enough for a substantial down payment on something smaller. You could cut your work schedule in half and actually have time to enjoy your life. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Mom gradually being worn down by the practical logic of their arguments. I listened in growing horror as my family planned to sell the very thing I'd been working for years to protect, unaware that I was 3 weeks away from surprising them with ownership of not just our house, but the entire neighborhood. When the call finally disconnected, I sat in stunned silence in my quarters, trying to process what I'd just heard. Jessica, I know this house has sentimental value for you, but you have to think about what's best for your mother's health and financial stability. She's been carrying this burden alone for too long. The irony was devastating. Mark was positioning himself as Mom's protector, arguing for her welfare, while I was being cast as the sentimental daughter who cared more about preserving memories than solving practical problems. If they knew what I'd actually been doing, they would understand that I was the one who had been working to solve Mom's financial problems permanently. Just give me 1 week, I repeated, more firmly this time. Before you sign anything, let me see what I can do. Mom nodded reluctantly. 1 week, Jess. But please understand that we can't keep going the way we have been. Something has to change. After the call ended, I immediately contacted Monica and Major Sarah Williams to discuss emergency acceleration of the mortgage purchase. The legal complexities were significant, but they agreed to explore every possible option for completing the transaction within 7 days. I also began researching Paul Henderson, the potential buyer who had appeared so conveniently with a cash offer. What I discovered over the next few days would add another layer of urgency to an already desperate situation. Paul Henderson was exactly the kind of predatory investor I'd been working to keep out of our neighborhood. He specialized in buying properties from financially distressed families at below-market prices, then either flipping them for quick profits or converting them to expensive rental units that displaced long-time residents. Henderson had a pattern of targeting military families, timing his offers to coincide with deployments when family members were financially stressed and emotionally vulnerable. He'd purchased 17 properties in Riverside over the past 2 years, and every one of them had either been flipped for a substantial profit or converted to luxury rentals with rents that the original neighbors couldn't afford. Our family home, purchased by Henderson for $195,000, would likely be resold within 6 months for $250,000 or more. Alternatively, it could be renovated and rented for $1,800 per month, pricing out the working-class families who had made our neighborhood a community. Everything I'd been working to prevent was about to happen to my own family's house, sold by people who had no idea they were being manipulated by someone who made a living exploiting military families' financial vulnerabilities. The call came at 3:17 a.m. Kuwait time on a Wednesday morning, jarring me from a restless sleep that had been plagued by anxiety dreams about losing our family home. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, expecting an emergency, but instead found Mark's face filling the screen with what appeared to be a celebration happening in the background. Jess, sorry about the time difference, but I couldn't wait to share the good news, Mark said, his voice carrying an excitement that immediately filled me with dread. We just finished the paperwork with Paul Henderson. The house is sold. Your mom is finally free from that financial burden. The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind Mark, I could see our kitchen, Dad's kitchen, filled with unfamiliar paperwork spread across the table where we used to eat family dinners. Mom was visible in the background, looking tired but relieved, while Tyler appeared to be taking photos of what I assumed were the signed documents. You sold it? I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I asked for 1 week. It's only been 5 days. Mark's expression shifted slightly, as if he was noticing my reaction for the first time. Henderson called yesterday with a deadline. He had another property he was considering, and he needed a commitment by today. We couldn't risk losing the offer. Mom wanted to wait. Tyler's voice came from off-camera, but Henderson was pretty clear that this was his final offer. Take it or leave it, you know? And honestly, Jess, we couldn't see any point in waiting. You're deployed for at least another 6 months, and this solves all our immediate problems. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 5 days. They had waited 5 days out of the week I'd asked for, then sold our family home to a predatory investor who would destroy everything Dad had built. How much? I asked, though I already knew the answer from their previous call. $195,000, Mark announced proudly. Cash deal, closing in 2 weeks. After paying off the mortgage, your mom will have almost $50,000 to start fresh, plus she'll save about $1,500 a month in housing costs. $50,000. They had sold a house worth at least $250,000, in a neighborhood where I controlled 23 other properties, to a man who would flip it for a massive profit while destroying the community character I'd spent 3 years protecting. But the most devastating part wasn't the financial loss, it was the realization that my family had made this decision without truly considering my perspective, my investment in our neighborhood, or my connection to Dad's memory. They had seen my request for 1 week as an inconvenient delay rather than a serious alternative worth exploring. "Jess, I know this is hard for you," Mom's voice came from the background as she moved closer to the camera. "But we had to think about practical matters. This house has been a struggle for years, and Mark helped me realize that holding on to it was hurting more than helping." Mark helped her realize. The phrasing stung because it revealed how completely Mark had assumed the role of decision-maker in our family. While I had been relegated to the status of distant relative whose opinions were acknowledged but not seriously considered. "Did you get any other appraisals?" I asked, grasping for some way to delay or reverse what had already happened. "Did you explore any other options?" Tyler moved into the camera frame, his face showing a mixture of defensiveness and irritation. "Jess, we're not idiots. Mark knows construction and property values. Henderson's offer was fair, especially for a quick cash sale. Not everyone has the luxury of waiting months for the perfect buyer." The comment revealed how little my family understood about real estate markets, property values, or investment strategies. They had trusted Mark's expertise without seeking professional appraisals or exploring alternative buyers, and they had accepted Henderson's artificial deadline as legitimate rather than recognizing it as a pressure tactic. "The closing is in 2 weeks, Mark continued, apparently unaware of my emotional state. "Henderson is taking care of all the paperwork, and he's even letting us stay in the house until we find an apartment. Really, this couldn't have worked out better." 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks before Paul Henderson would own the house where I'd grown up, where Dad's presence still lived in every room, where I'd planned to surprise Mom with a deed transfer that would have secured our family's future forever. "I need to go," I said abruptly, unable to continue the conversation without revealing everything or saying something I would regret. "I have duties to attend to." "Jess, wait," Mom called out, her voice carrying concern for the first time. "I know you're upset, but please try to understand. This is what's best for our family right now." Best for our family. The phrase echoed in my mind as I ended the call and sat in the darkness of my quarters, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had just been destroyed. My family had no idea that they had just sold our home to me, or rather, to the investment company that I controlled, at a price that was $55,000 below market value. More devastating was the realization that they had made this decision based on incomplete information, without exploring alternatives that I could have provided if I hadn't been so determined to maintain secrecy about my real estate activities. I immediately called Monica, despite the fact that it was early evening in Ohio. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice before I said a word. "Jessica, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I explained what had happened, the words tumbling out in a rush of anger, grief, and disbelief. Monica listened without interruption, and when I finished, the silence stretched for several long moments. "I need to tell you something," she finally said, her voice carrying a gravity that made my stomach clench. "Paul Henderson contacted me 3 days ago." "What do you mean he contacted you?" "He called my office asking about investment opportunities in the Maple Street district. Specifically, he wanted to know if I represented any investors who might be interested in selling properties in that area. He mentioned that he was assembling a larger development project." The implications hit me immediately. Henderson wasn't just buying random distressed properties, he was systematically targeting our neighborhood for development, and he somehow knew that there was a major investor controlling multiple properties in the area. "Did you tell him anything?" "Of course not. Client confidentiality is absolute. But Jessica, I think he's been researching property ownership records in your neighborhood. He may know more about your holdings than you realize." This revelation added another layer of devastation to an already catastrophic situation. Henderson hadn't just stumbled across our family home as a random opportunity, he had likely targeted it as part of a larger strategy to gain control of properties in a neighborhood where I was the dominant investor. My family had been manipulated into selling our home to exactly the kind of predatory investor I'd been working to keep out of our community, and they had done it without realizing they were undermining everything I'd built to protect them. "Monica, what are my options?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that my choices were extremely limited. "Legally, you can't stop a sale that's already been agreed to, especially since you're not listed as a party with legal standing in the property. Your mother owns the house, and she has the right to sell it to whomever she chooses." "What about the mortgage purchase we were arranging?" That becomes irrelevant once the property is sold to a third party. Henderson will either pay cash or arrange his own financing. Either way, your opportunity to gain control through the mortgage is gone. Monica paused, and I could hear her typing, probably checking legal databases or property records. Jessica, there is one option, but it's extreme and it would require revealing everything to your family immediately. What option? You could make a counteroffer to Henderson, using your investment company as the buyer. If you're willing to pay more than his $195,000 offer, your family might be willing to sell to you instead. The idea was logical but emotionally devastating. I would have to reveal my secret real estate empire not as a surprise gift, but as an emergency intervention to prevent disaster. Instead of amazing my family with my success, I would be forced to explain why I had kept them in the dark while they struggled with financial problems I could have solved. Worse, I would have to outbid a predatory investor for the right to buy my own childhood home, paying market rate for a property that should never have been for sale in the first place. How much would I need to offer? Probably at least $220,000 to make it worth the complications of changing buyers this late in the process. Maybe more if Henderson decides to compete. $220,000 for a house that would have cost me $180,000 if I'd purchased the mortgage as planned. The difference represented not just money, but the cost of secrets, poor timing, and family dynamics that I'd underestimated. Monica, set it up. Contact my family and tell them that your client, my investment company, is interested in making a counteroffer. Don't reveal my identity yet, but get them to agree to a meeting. Jessica, are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back to the surprise reveal you wanted. Your family is going to have questions that will lead to the truth. I thought about Dad, about the promises I'd made at his grave, about the 3 years I'd spent building something meaningful. That was about to be destroyed by a combination of poor communication and predatory business practices. Set up the meeting, Monica. It's time to stop hiding. The 24 hours following my decision to intervene in the sale were a whirlwind of phone calls, legal research, and strategic planning that would have impressed my military commanders. For its complexity and coordination, Monica worked through the night to arrange a meeting with my family, while I coordinated with Major Sarah Williams to ensure our investment partnership could support the financial commitment I was about to make. But as I dug deeper into Paul Henderson's background and business practices, I discovered information that transformed this from a personal family crisis into something much larger and more sinister. Henderson wasn't just a predatory investor, he was the front man for a development company that specifically targeted neighborhoods with high concentrations of military families. The pattern was sophisticated and deeply troubling. Henderson's company, Midwest Property Solutions, would research military deployment schedules, identify families facing financial stress during extended separations, and time their purchase offers to coincide with periods when service members were overseas and unable to participate directly in family decisions. They had perfected a system of creating artificial urgency through limited-time offers, presenting themselves as helpful problem solvers while actually exploiting the exact vulnerabilities that military deployment created. Families like mine, struggling with the financial and emotional pressures of having a primary breadwinner overseas, were particularly susceptible to their tactics. What made Henderson's strategy especially insidious was his use of legitimate-sounding deadlines and alternative buyers to pressure families into quick decisions. His claim that he had another property he was considering was a standard script designed to prevent potential sellers from taking time to research alternatives or seek additional opinions. I spent hours reviewing public records and property databases, tracking Henderson's purchases throughout Ohio over the past 3 years. The pattern was unmistakable: 17 properties purchased from military families, all at below market prices, all during periods when service members were deployed and unable to participate directly in negotiations. Even more disturbing was what happened to those properties after Henderson purchased them. Every single house had either been flipped for substantial profits within 6 months or converted to high-end rental properties with rents that exceeded what the original owners had been paying in mortgage payments. Henderson's business model depended on displacement, buying homes from families who could afford to live in them, then selling or renting them to people with higher incomes, gradually changing the economic character of entire neighborhoods. It was gentrification by design, and military families were his preferred targets because their circumstances made them particularly vulnerable to his tactics. Our neighborhood had been selected for this treatment because of its high concentration of military families, stable property values, and proximity to both Columbus and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Henderson's purchase of our family home wasn't an isolated transaction. It was the opening move in a systematic effort to transform the Maple Street district into something entirely different from the working-class community where I'd grown up. The research also revealed why Henderson had been asking Monica about other investors in our area. He had somehow discovered that there was a major property owner controlling multiple houses in the neighborhood, and he was trying to identify potential competitors or partners for his development plans. If Henderson knew about my property holdings, he might also know that I was a deployed military service member, which would make his targeting of my family even more calculated and predatory. The timeline of his offer, coming just days after I'd asked my family to wait a week, suggested that he might have been monitoring our family's financial situation and decision-making process. This possibility filled me with rage that went far beyond personal hurt. It was one thing for my family to make a decision I disagreed with based on their understanding of the situation. It was entirely different for them to be manipulated by someone who made a living exploiting military families' vulnerabilities. I called Monica with my findings and asked her to research Henderson's company more thoroughly, looking specifically for any evidence of systematic targeting of military families or coordination with information sources that might have alerted him to our family situation. Meanwhile, I began reaching out to other military families in our area who had sold properties to Henderson over the past few years. Most were reluctant to discuss their experiences in detail, but the conversations I did have confirmed my suspicions about his business practices. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, whose husband had sold their home to Henderson while she was deployed to Iraq, described a process that was identical to what my family had experienced. He came to us during the worst possible time, she told me during a phone call. David was struggling to keep up with everything while I was gone, and Henderson made it sound like selling was the only rational choice. We didn't realize until later that we could have gotten $20,000 more from a different buyer. Similar stories emerged from other families. Captain James Mitchell's wife had sold their duplex to Henderson while James was in Afghanistan, accepting an offer that was $30,000 below market value because Henderson convinced her that military families were poor credit risks who couldn't qualify for traditional financing. Staff Sergeant Linda Chen, ironically no relation to my financial advisor Monica, had been pressured into a quick sale when Henderson claimed that changes in base assignments might flood the local market with military housing, driving down property values. The prediction had proved completely false, but not before Henderson purchased her home for $40,000 below its actual worth. Each story followed the same pattern: artificial urgency, exploitation of deployment-related stress, and purchase prices that substantially favored Henderson while leaving military families with far less than their properties were actually worth. As I compiled this information, I realized that my intervention in our family's sale could serve a purpose beyond just recovering our home. If I could expose Henderson's systematic exploitation of military families, I might be able to help other families avoid similar manipulation while protecting our neighborhood from predatory development. The counteroffer strategy that Monica was arranging would need to be more than just a financial transaction, it would need to be the opening move in a campaign to protect military families from the kind of exploitation that Henderson represented. But first, I had to face my family with the truth about what I'd been doing for the past 3 years, why I'd kept it secret, and how their decision to trust Henderson had nearly destroyed everything I'd worked to build. Monica called me back with the meeting arrangements. They've agreed to meet tomorrow evening to hear our counteroffer. I've explained that my client is a military family investment group that specializes in preserving affordable housing in communities with military connections. That seemed to resonate with your mother. Did they ask any specific questions about the identity of the investor? Your brother Tyler asked if it was someone local, and your mother wanted to know if the investor would be a good neighbor. I assured them that the buyer was someone who understood the community and would respect its character. The irony of these concerns was painful. My family was worried about whether the anonymous investor would be a good neighbor, while they had been prepared to sell to Henderson without any similar concerns about his intentions for the property or the community. Monica, I want you to prepare a presentation that goes beyond just our counteroffer. I want to show them exactly what Henderson's business model involves, what's happened to other military families who've sold to him, and what his plans likely are for our neighborhood. Jessica, that's a lot of information to process in one meeting. Are you sure you want to overwhelm them with all of this at once? They need to understand that this isn't just about our family home. This is about protecting our entire community from systematic exploitation. If I'm going to reveal what I've been building, I want them to understand why it matters. Monica agreed to prepare the comprehensive presentation, and we spent the next several hours organizing property records, financial analyses, and documentation of Henderson's business practices into a format that would clearly demonstrate both the immediate threat to our family and the broader implications for our neighborhood. As I prepared for what would likely be the most important conversation of my life, I realized that the surprise homecoming I'd planned for years had evolved into something much more significant. Instead of simply giving my family financial security, I was about to reveal that I had built something that could protect our entire community from the kind of predatory practices that targeted military families. The revelation would be painful and complicated, involving difficult conversations about trust, communication, and family decision-making. But it would also demonstrate that military service could be leveraged not just for personal advancement, but for community protection and social justice. Whether my family would understand and appreciate what I'd accomplished, or whether they would feel deceived and manipulated by my secrecy, remained to be seen. But either way, it was time to stop hiding and start fighting for what I'd spent 3 years building. The video call was scheduled for 8 p.m. Ohio time, which meant 4 a.m. for me in Kuwait, but I had been awake for hours anyway, rehearsing what I would say and how I would handle my family's reactions. Monica had spent the day preparing a presentation that would systematically reveal both my property holdings and Henderson's predatory business practices, but I knew that the emotional impact of the revelation would be far more complex than any financial documentation could convey. When the call connected, I found myself looking at our kitchen table once again, but this time the atmosphere was formal and tense rather than celebratory. Mom sat directly across from the camera, looking tired and slightly defensive. Mark was beside her, wearing the serious expression he used when discussing business matters. Tyler was visible in the background, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. Monica appeared in a small window in the corner of my screen, her own video call connecting us all together for what would prove to be the most difficult conversation of my life. "Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting," Monica began professionally. "My client has asked me to present a counteroffer for the property at 847 Maple Street, but before we discuss financial terms, there are some important things you need to understand about both the current buyer and the investor I represent." Mark leaned forward, immediately taking the lead in the conversation. "We appreciate your client's interest, but we've already committed to Paul Henderson. Unless you're offering significantly more money, I'm not sure what there is to discuss." "That's exactly what we're here to discuss," Monica replied smoothly. "But first, I need to show you some information about Paul Henderson's business practices that you may not be aware of." For the next 15 minutes, Monica systematically presented the research I had compiled about Henderson's targeting of military families. She showed property records demonstrating the pattern of below-market purchases, documented the artificial deadlines and pressure tactics he used, and revealed what had happened to other military families who had sold their homes to his company. The presentation was devastating in its thoroughness. Chart after chart showed Henderson's systematic exploitation of deployed service members' families, with each transaction following the same script of artificial urgency and financial manipulation that my family had experienced. Mom's expression changed gradually from defensive to shocked to angry as she realized how thoroughly they had been manipulated. Tyler stopped leaning against the counter and moved closer to the table, studying the documentation with growing alarm. Mark's face darkened as he understood that his role as protector and advisor had been undermined by someone with far more experience in manipulation. "This can't be right," Mark said finally, his voice carrying the frustration of someone who prided himself on not being fooled. Henderson seemed legitimate. He knew about construction, about property values. He wasn't some slick salesman. "That's exactly why his system works," Monica replied. "He presents himself as a knowledgeable local investor who's offering a fair deal during a difficult time. But the documentation shows clearly that he targets military families specifically because deployment creates the exact kind of stress and urgency that makes people vulnerable to his tactics." Tyler spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying a note of embarrassment. "So you're saying we got scammed?" "You were targeted by someone who makes a living exploiting military family circumstances," Monica corrected gently. "There's a difference between being scammed and being manipulated by someone with sophisticated knowledge of your vulnerabilities." Mom had been silent during most of this exchange, but now she looked directly at the camera with tears in her eyes. "We thought we were making a smart decision. We thought we were being practical and responsible." "You were trying to solve real problems with the information you had," Monica said. "But you didn't have all the information you needed to make the best decision for your family." Mark looked confused and frustrated. "So what are you suggesting? That we back out of a signed agreement because we don't like the buyer's business practices?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Monica said firmly. "And I'm going to show you why." This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating for hours. Monica nodded to me, indicating that it was time for me to reveal my identity and explain what I had been building for the past 3 years. "Mom, Mark, Tyler," I said, my voice steadier than I had expected. Monica's client is me. I'm the investor who wants to buy our house. The silence that followed was profound and painful. Mom stared at the camera in shock. Mark's mouth actually fell open, and Tyler sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. What do you mean you're the investor? Mom asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean I've been building a real estate portfolio in our neighborhood for 3 years, I said, forcing myself to speak clearly and calmly. I currently own 23 properties in the Maple Street district, and I was 3 weeks away from purchasing our family home's mortgage from the bank when you decided to sell to Henderson. 23 properties? Tyler repeated, as if the number was too large to comprehend. How is that possible? Monica took over the explanation, displaying property records and financial statements that showed the scope of what I had built. Property by property, she revealed my holdings: the original house on Oak Street where it all began, the duplex on Pine Avenue, the cluster of homes on Cedar and Birch Streets, and ultimately the entire 4-block area that I now controlled. Your daughter has built one of the most impressive small-scale real estate portfolios I've ever seen, Monica explained. She used her military benefits, deployment savings, and rental income to systematically acquire properties throughout your neighborhood, creating both personal wealth and community stability. Mark was the first to find his voice, and his tone carried a mixture of amazement and accusation. Jessica, why didn't you tell us about any of this? We've been struggling with money for years, and you were building an empire in our own neighborhood? The question I had been dreading had finally been asked, and I knew that my answer would determine whether my family understood my motivations or saw them as betrayal. I wanted to surprise you, I said simply. I wanted to buy back our house and give Mom the deed as a gift. I wanted to prove that I could solve our family's problems and honor Dad's memory at the same time. But we didn't know we didn't have problems to solve, Mom said, her voice carrying a note of confusion and hurt. The silence after Mom's unfinished statement stretched across the video call like a chasm that separated us by far more than the physical distance between Kuwait and Ohio. I could see the pain and confusion in her eyes, the realization that while she had been working double shifts and struggling to keep our family afloat, I had been secretly building wealth that could have solved all her problems. You let us struggle, she finally finished, her voice breaking slightly. You watched us worry about money, watched me work myself to exhaustion, and you never said anything about what you were really doing. The accusation hit me harder than any physical blow I'd ever experienced in military training. My mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep our family together after Dad's death, felt that I had betrayed her by keeping my success secret while she suffered. Tyler leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. Jess, do you have any idea what Mom has been through? She's been working 60-hour weeks, eating ramen noodles for dinner so she could afford our groceries. And you were sitting on a real estate empire the whole time? Mark's reaction was different but equally painful. He looked at me with the expression of someone who had been made to feel foolish, his role as Mom's protector and financial advisor suddenly revealed as unnecessary and misguided. Jessica, I've been trying to help your mother make practical decisions based on what I thought was her real financial situation. If I'd known she had a daughter who owned half the neighborhood, I would have given very different advice. Monica intervened before the conversation could spiral further into recrimination. I think there are some important things that need to be clarified here, she said firmly. Jessica, can you explain to your family why you chose to keep your investments private? I took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would determine whether my family could understand my motivations or whether the damage to our relationships would be permanent. I wanted to surprise you with security, not burden you with explanations of something that wasn't finished yet, I began, trying to find words that would convey the complexity of my reasoning. I was planning to buy back our house and transfer the deed to Mom as a gift. I wanted to prove that military service could provide the resources to protect our family's legacy, to honor Dad's memory by preserving what he built for us. Every property I bought was part of a larger plan to secure our neighborhood against exactly what Henderson is trying to do. I paused, seeing the skepticism in Tyler's expression and the hurt that was still evident in Mom's eyes. But more than that, I was afraid that if I told you what I was doing, you might feel obligated to accept my help instead of choosing it freely. I wanted Mom to know that she could keep our house because she wanted to, not because she felt indebted to me. Mark shook his head slowly. Jessica, that's a beautiful sentiment, but it's also incredibly naive. Your mother has been suffering for years because she didn't know she had options. You took away her right to make informed decisions about her own life. The criticism stung because it was accurate. In my determination to create the perfect surprise, I had indeed denied my family the information they needed to make the best choices for their situation. My good intentions had created the very problems I was trying to solve. Monica sensed that the conversation needed to shift from recrimination to problem solving. The question now isn't whether different choices could have been made in the past, she said diplomatically. The question is what choices we can make now to protect this family and this community from Paul Henderson's predatory practices. She pulled up a new set of documents on the screen, showing property maps that illustrated my holdings in relation to Henderson's likely development plans. Henderson isn't just buying your house randomly, she explained. He's trying to assemble enough properties in this area to control its development character. If he succeeds, he'll transform this entire neighborhood into something that your longtime neighbors won't be able to afford. The map was stark in its implications. Henderson's purchase of our family home would give him a foothold in the center of the neighborhood, surrounded by properties that I controlled. If he could convince other homeowners to sell, or if he could pressure me to sell some of my properties, he could create the kind of gentrification project that had displaced military families throughout Ohio. But he doesn't know that Jessica owns all these properties? Tyler asked, studying the map with new understanding. That's correct, Monica replied. All of Jessica's holdings are owned through investment companies and limited liability corporations. From Henderson's perspective, he's dealing with individual homeowners and possibly some small-scale investors. He has no idea that there's a single person who controls most of the neighborhood. This was the moment when the true power of what I had built became clear, not just to my family but to me as well. For 3 years, I had been thinking about my real estate portfolio as a collection of individual investments that happened to be in the same area. But Monica's presentation revealed something much more significant. I had accidentally created a defensive barrier against exactly the kind of predatory development that was now threatening our community. Mark was the first to grasp the strategic implications. So Henderson thinks he's buying into a neighborhood where he can gradually acquire more properties and control development. But actually, he's buying into a neighborhood where the majority of properties are already controlled by someone who has completely different intentions. Exactly, Monica confirmed. And that gives Jessica enormous leverage in determining what happens next. I felt a surge of clarity and purpose that reminded me of the feeling I got when a complex military logistics problem suddenly revealed its solution. What if we don't just block Henderson's sale? I asked. What if we use this situation to protect other military families from his targeting strategy? Monica smiled, and I could tell she had been hoping I would reach this conclusion. What did you have in mind? The plan that emerged over the next hour of discussion was more ambitious than anything I had previously contemplated, but it felt like the natural evolution of everything I had been building toward. Instead of simply purchasing our family home to prevent Henderson from acquiring it, we would create a comprehensive community protection program that could serve as a model for other neighborhoods with high concentrations of military families. The first phase would involve purchasing our house at a price that was fair to my family while being high enough to discourage Henderson from competing. More importantly, we would structure the purchase in a way that demonstrated to other neighborhood families that they had alternatives to Henderson's predatory offers. The second phase would involve reaching out to other military families in our area who were facing financial pressures, offering them legitimate alternatives to selling their homes to predatory investors. Using the resources of my property portfolio and the expertise that Monica and Major Sarah Williams had developed, we could provide bridge financing, property management services, and financial counseling that would help families weather temporary difficulties without losing their homes. The third phase was the most ambitious, creating a legal structure that would prevent predatory investors from systematically targeting our neighborhood in the future. By working with local government officials and community organizations, we could establish zoning protections, first right of refusal agreements, and other legal mechanisms that would give longtime residents control over their neighborhood's development. This is a lot more than just buying back your family home, Mark observed, but his tone had shifted from criticism to cautious admiration. You're talking about community organizing on a scale that could take years to implement. I have years, I replied simply. I have a military career that provides steady income, a property portfolio that generates passive income, and a partnership with other military investors who understand the importance of protecting communities that serve military families. Tyler had been quiet during most of this planning discussion, but now he leaned forward with an expression I recognized from our childhood, the look he got when he was trying to understand something that seemed too big to grasp. Jess, are you saying you're rich enough to buy our house and help other families too? The question was direct and practical, typical of Tyler's straightforward approach to complex problems. Monica answered before I could respond. Your sister has built a property portfolio worth approximately $2.8 million, she said matter-of-factly. The rental income alone generates enough monthly cash flow to cover the mortgage payments on every property she owns, with substantial profits remaining for reinvestment or community programs. The number seemed to echo in the silence that followed. Mom's eyes widened, Mark's expression shifted to something approaching awe, and Tyler sat back in his chair as if he'd been physically pushed. $8 million? Mom repeated softly. Jessica, how did you build something like that in just 3 years? I tried to explain the combination of factors that had made my success possible: the tax advantages of deployment income, the depressed property values following the financial crisis, the benefits of VA loans and military investment programs, and the strategic focus on a single neighborhood that allowed for efficient management and community impact. But as I talked, I realized that the specific financial mechanics mattered less than the underlying principle that had guided everything I'd done. I used every advantage that military service provided to build something that could protect the community where Dad raised us, I said finally. Every deployment dollar, every VA loan benefit, every hour I spent researching real estate markets, all of it was focused on creating security for our family and our neighbors. Mark's expression had shifted completely during this conversation, from defensive antagonism to grudging respect to something approaching amazement. Jessica, I owe you an apology, he said finally. I thought I was protecting your mother by pushing for practical decisions, but I was operating with incomplete information. If I'd known what you were building, I would have encouraged her to wait for your plan instead of accepting Henderson's offer. The apology meant more than Mark probably realized, because it acknowledged that my secret keeping, while misguided, had been motivated by good intentions rather than selfishness or disregard for my family's welfare. Mom had been quiet during this exchange, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a complexity of emotions that I couldn't entirely decipher. Jessica, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm grateful that you've been working to protect our family. But I'm also hurt that you didn't trust us enough to share what you were doing. Her words captured the essential tension that would need to be resolved before our family could move forward. My success was meaningful, but my secrecy had created pain and misunderstanding that would take time and effort to heal. Mom, I'm sorry, I said, meaning it completely. I thought I was protecting you from worry and giving you a wonderful surprise. Instead, I created a situation where you struggled unnecessarily and made decisions based on incomplete information. That was wrong, regardless of my intentions. Tyler nodded in agreement. Jess, we get that you meant well, but next time you're building a real estate empire, maybe give us a heads up? His comment broke some of the tension in the conversation, and I saw Mom smile for the first time since the call had begun. There won't be a next time, I promised. From now on, we make family decisions together, with all the information on the table. Monica cleared her throat diplomatically. Speaking of decisions that need to be made together, we have a time-sensitive situation to resolve. Paul Henderson is expecting to close on this house in less than 2 weeks, and if we're going to present an alternative, we need to act quickly. The next phase of our conversation shifted from emotional reconciliation to practical planning, and I was relieved to see my family approaching the situation as a team rather than as adversaries. Monica had prepared a comprehensive counteroffer that would not only prevent Henderson from acquiring our house but also demonstrate to our neighbors that predatory investors could be successfully challenged. Here's what I propose, Monica began, pulling up financial documents that showed the structure of my investment company. We offer to purchase 847 Maple Street for $225,000, which is $30,000 more than Henderson's offer and closer to the property's actual market value. Mark immediately grasped the strategic implications. That sends a message to Henderson that he's not the only buyer in the market, and it shows other families in the neighborhood that they don't have to accept below-market offers. Exactly, Monica confirmed. But more importantly, it allows Jessica's family to make a decision based on accurate information about their options, rather than artificial pressure from someone with ulterior motives. Tyler looked puzzled by something in the proposal. But if Jess is buying the house, where are we supposed to live? Are you kicking us out of our own home? I had been anticipating this question, and my answer represented one of the most important decisions I had made about how to structure our family's future. Tyler, I'm not buying the house to own it. I'm buying it to protect it and then transfer ownership to Mom. The goal isn't to make money from our family home, it's to ensure that our family home stays with our family. Mom looked confused by this arrangement. Jessica, if you're paying $225,000 for the house, how can you just give it to me? That doesn't make financial sense. Monica explained the legal and tax implications of what I was proposing. Jessica can purchase the property through her investment company, then transfer ownership to you as a gift. There are some tax considerations, but they're manageable. Essentially, Jessica would be using her business resources to solve her family's housing problem permanently. The concept was more complex than a simple purchase and gift, but the underlying principle was straightforward. I would use the wealth I had built through military service and real estate investment to provide my family with the security and stability that Dad would have wanted them to have. Mark studied the financial projections that Monica had prepared, and his expression showed that he was beginning to understand the scope of what was possible. Jessica, if you can afford to buy the house and give it to your mother, what else could be possible? Could you help Tyler finish school? Could you help Emma with nursing school costs? The questions revealed how completely our family's perspective on their financial situation had changed in the course of a single conversation. Problems that had seemed insurmountable an hour ago were now being discussed as manageable challenges that could be addressed with appropriate resources and planning. All of that is possible, I confirmed. But I don't want to just throw money at problems. I want to create sustainable solutions that help our family build their own independence and security. I explained the broader vision that had emerged from my conversation with Monica and Major Sarah Williams. Instead of simply using my wealth to solve my family's immediate problems, we could create a comprehensive support system that would help them build their own financial stability while contributing to the community protection program I was developing. Tyler could return to school with financial support, but he would also work part-time for the property management company, learning valuable skills while contributing to the business that was funding his education. Emma could continue nursing school without financial stress, and after graduation, she could work with our community health initiatives that served military families. Mom could retire from her exhausting bank job and instead manage the community outreach programs that would help other military families avoid the kind of predatory targeting that Henderson represented. Her years of experience in banking and her natural empathy for struggling families made her uniquely qualified for this kind of work. Mark's construction expertise could be invaluable for the property renovation and maintenance work that was essential to keeping our portfolio profitable and our community attractive. Instead of struggling to find steady work with various contractors, he could develop a stable career managing property improvements while contributing to community development. You're talking about turning our family problems into community solutions, Mark observed, and I could see that he was impressed by the scope of what was being proposed. That's exactly what I'm talking about, I confirmed. Every challenge our family has faced, financial pressure during deployment, difficulty maintaining property on single incomes, vulnerability to predatory business practices, these are problems that military families throughout Ohio are dealing with. If we can solve them for ourselves, we can help solve them for others. Monica had been taking notes during this discussion, and now she presented a timeline for implementing both the immediate solution to our family's housing situation and the longer-term community protection program. The house purchase can be completed within 2 weeks, which will prevent Henderson from acquiring it while giving your family time to make thoughtful decisions about your future, she explained. The community program will take longer to develop, but we can begin reaching out to other at-risk families immediately. Tyler raised a practical question that showed he was taking the proposal seriously. What about Henderson? Is he just going to give up when we tell him we're not selling to him anymore? Monica's expression grew serious. Paul Henderson is not going to be happy about losing this deal, and he may try to cause problems. But Jessica's property holdings give us significant leverage if he wants to continue operating in this neighborhood. She explained that Henderson's development plans depended on acquiring multiple properties in our area, and my control of 23 houses meant that I could effectively block any large-scale gentrification project he might have planned. If he tried to retaliate against our family for refusing his offer, he would be fighting someone with far more resources and community support than he anticipated. Plus, Monica added with a slight smile, Henderson's business model depends on secrecy and isolation. Military families become vulnerable to his tactics when they don't know they have alternatives and when they're making decisions alone. Our community protection program will eliminate both of those vulnerabilities. The conversation was interrupted by a phone ringing in the background of my family's video feed. Mark answered it, and I could see his expression change as he listened to whoever was calling. That was Paul Henderson, Mark announced when he hung up. He wants to meet tomorrow to finalize the paperwork and discuss his plans for the property. He sounded impatient. Monica and I exchanged a look that conveyed our mutual understanding of what Henderson's impatience likely meant. He was probably concerned about competition from other buyers, and he wanted to complete the transaction before my family had time to reconsider their decision. Perfect, Monica said decisively. We'll attend that meeting and present our counteroffer directly. Henderson needs to understand that he's not the only option available to this family. I felt a surge of anticipation that reminded me of the feeling I got before important military operations. Everything we had discussed was about to be put to the test, and Henderson's reaction would reveal both his true intentions and the effectiveness of the strategy we had developed. Mom, are you comfortable with confronting Henderson directly? I asked, knowing that the meeting would require her to stand up to someone who had successfully manipulated her into a disadvantageous agreement. Linda Thompson, who had raised 3 children alone after losing her husband, who had worked double shifts for years to keep our family together, and who had just learned that her daughter had secretly built a multi-million-dollar business empire, straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the camera. "Jessica, I've been dealing with difficult men trying to pressure me into bad decisions for most of my adult life," she said with a strength that reminded me why Dad had fallen in love with her. Paul Henderson is about to learn that this family doesn't intimidate easily. The meeting with Paul Henderson took place in our family kitchen, the same room where I had eaten countless dinners as a child and where my family had recently celebrated what they thought was a successful home sale. Monica had flown in from Columbus specifically for this confrontation, arriving with a briefcase full of documentation that would systematically dismantle Henderson's predatory business model. I participated via video call, watching from my quarters in Kuwait as the most important negotiation of my life unfolded in the space where Dad used to read the morning newspaper. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. We were fighting for Dad's legacy in the exact location where he had planned our family's future. Henderson arrived precisely on time, carrying his own briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone who expected to complete a routine business transaction. He was younger than I had anticipated, probably in his late 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested success and reliability. His greeting to my family was warm and professional, designed to reinforce the impression that he was a helpful problem solver rather than a predatory investor. "Linda, Mark, Tyler," he said as he settled into his chair, "I'm excited to finalize this transaction and help your family start fresh. I've brought all the closing documents, and we can have everything signed within an hour." Monica had positioned herself slightly outside Henderson's direct line of sight, allowing him to focus on my family while she observed his behavior and reactions. When Mom introduced her as a consultant we've asked to review the paperwork, Henderson's expression flickered briefly with annoyance before returning to professional pleasantness. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I always encourage sellers to have representation. There's nothing in this transaction that won't bear scrutiny." Mark took the lead in presenting our position, and I was proud to see him approach the conversation with the kind of careful preparation that Henderson probably hadn't expected. "Paul, before we sign anything, we've received another offer for the property that we need to consider." Henderson's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of expressing polite interest in learning about the competing offer, his face tightened with irritation that he quickly tried to conceal. "I thought we had an agreement," he said, his tone carrying a subtle edge that hadn't been present moments before. "Bringing in another buyer at this stage complicates things unnecessarily." Monica recognized this as her cue to enter the conversation. "Mr. Henderson, I represent an investment group that specializes in preserving affordable housing in communities with military connections. We're prepared to offer $225,000 for this property, with closing in 2 weeks." The number was $30,000 higher than Henderson's offer, but his reaction suggested that money wasn't his primary concern. "That's a generous offer," he said carefully, "but I've already invested significant time and resources into this transaction. Changing buyers now would create delays and complications that might not be in everyone's best interest." Tyler, who had been quiet during the opening exchanges, spoke up with a directness that caught Henderson off guard. "What kind of complications? If someone's offering more money for our house, why wouldn't we take it?" Henderson's response revealed the first glimpse of the pressure tactics that I had researched in his other transactions. "Well, Tyler, real estate transactions are complex. This new buyer would need to arrange financing, conduct inspections, and complete legal documentation. That process could take months, during which your family would continue struggling with the financial pressures that led you to sell in the first place." Monica immediately challenged this characterization. "Actually, our buyer is prepared to purchase with cash, waive inspection contingencies, and close within 2 weeks. There would be no delays or complications." Henderson's composure slipped further as he realized that his standard tactics weren't working with this family. "Cash buyers often have their own agendas," he said, adopting a tone of concerned protectiveness. "They might be planning to flip the property for a quick profit, or convert it to rental housing that would change the character of your neighborhood." This was the opening that Monica had been waiting for. "That's an interesting concern, Mr. Henderson, especially coming from someone whose business model involves exactly those practices." She opened her briefcase and began laying out the documentation we had prepared, property records showing Henderson's 17 previous purchases from military families, financial analyses demonstrating his below-market pricing strategies, and follow-up reports showing what had happened to each property after he acquired it. Sergeant Rodriguez, Captain Mitchell, Staff Sergeant Chen, Monica read from her notes, all military families who sold their homes to you during deployments. In every case, they received prices that were 15 to 30% below market value. In every case, you either flipped the properties for substantial profits or converted them to luxury rentals that their original neighbors couldn't afford. Henderson's mask of professional pleasantness finally dropped completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. I provide a valuable service to families facing financial difficulties, he said defensively. Quick cash sales solve immediate problems that traditional buyers can't address. By targeting families when they're most vulnerable and isolated, I said from the video screen, speaking directly to Henderson for the first time. By creating artificial deadlines and pressure tactics designed to prevent families from exploring alternatives or seeking additional opinions. Henderson turned toward the camera with an expression of surprise, as if he hadn't realized that a deployed service member was participating in the conversation. And you are? I'm Jessica Thompson, Linda's daughter and a sergeant in the United States Army currently deployed to Kuwait. I'm also the investor who's offering to purchase this property for $225,000. The revelation clearly shocked Henderson, though he tried to maintain his composure. I see. So this is a family member trying to interfere with a legitimate business transaction. Monica's response was swift and devastating. This is a deployed service member protecting her family from the kind of predatory practices that you've used against 17 other military families in Ohio over the past 3 years. She continued laying out documents, each one building the case that Henderson's business model depended on systematic exploitation of military families' vulnerabilities. Property records, financial analyses, and testimonials from other affected families created an overwhelming picture of calculated predation disguised as helpful problem-solving. Henderson realized that his usual tactics were not only failing but actively backfiring. These people had done their research, they understood his business model, and they had resources he hadn't anticipated. Look, he said, abandoning his helpful persona entirely, I made a legitimate offer for this property, and we have a signed agreement. If you want to break that agreement, there could be legal consequences. Mark's response showed that he had learned from his earlier mistake of trusting Henderson's expertise without verification. Paul, we've had our attorney review the purchase agreement. The contingency clauses give us the right to cancel the sale for several reasons, including material misrepresentation of market conditions. Monica pulled out another document that Henderson couldn't have anticipated. Speaking of market conditions, we've prepared a comprehensive analysis of property values in this neighborhood, including recent comparable sales and projected appreciation rates. The analysis revealed that Henderson's $195,000 offer was not just below market value but substantially below what the property could reasonably be expected to sell for in a fair transaction. More damaging was the revelation that Henderson had systematically undervalued properties throughout the area, creating an artificial impression of depressed market conditions that made his offers seem more reasonable than they actually were. Mr. Henderson, Mom said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years working in banking and understood financial documentation, you told us that military families were high-risk sellers who couldn't expect to receive full market value for their properties. This analysis shows that assessment was completely false. Henderson's final attempt at control involved a threat that revealed both his desperation and his fundamental misunderstanding of what he was dealing with. You people don't understand how real estate development works, he said angrily. I have plans for this entire neighborhood, and this property is essential to those plans. If you interfere with this sale, you might find that other opportunities in this area become less available. The threat was vague but clearly intended to intimidate my family into compliance. What Henderson didn't know was that he had just threatened someone who controlled most of the neighborhood he was claiming to have plans for. Monica smiled as she pulled out the final piece of documentation that would end Henderson's predatory activities in our area permanently. Mr. Henderson, I think you should see this before you make any more threats about opportunities in this neighborhood. She laid out a property map that showed every house, duplex, and small apartment building in the 4-block Maple Street district. Highlighted in blue were the 23 properties owned by my investment company. Highlighted in red was 847 Maple Street, the only property Henderson was attempting to acquire. The map made it immediately clear that Henderson's development plans, whatever they might have been, were impossible to implement because he would never be able to acquire the properties necessary to create a large-scale gentrification project. Your business model depends on buying multiple properties in target neighborhoods and controlling their development, Monica explained. That strategy won't work in an area where a single investor already controls 85% of the available housing stock. Henderson stared at the map in disbelief, realizing that his elaborate plans for our neighborhood had been based on a complete misunderstanding of who actually owned the properties he needed. "This is impossible," he said finally. "No individual investor could have acquired that many properties without triggering attention from developers like me." "You're right that it would be difficult for an individual investor," I said from the screen. "But it's not difficult for a deployed service member who spent 3 years systematically using military benefits, deployment savings, and community knowledge to build exactly this kind of concentrated portfolio." The revelation transformed Henderson's expression from angry frustration to genuine fear as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. He hadn't just failed to acquire a single property, he had revealed his predatory business model to someone with the resources and community position to expose his practices throughout Ohio. "What do you want?" he asked finally, abandoning all pretense of negotiation or threat. Monica's response was clear and non-negotiable. "We want you to cease all activities targeting military families in this area. We want you to cancel the purchase agreement for this property. And we want you to understand that if you attempt to retaliate against this family or any other military families in Ohio, you'll be dealing with people who have both the resources and the legal standing to make your business practices very expensive." Henderson gathered his papers and stood to leave, but Tyler's final comment ensured that he understood exactly what he was walking away from. "Paul, just so you know, my sister didn't build this portfolio to make money. She built it to protect military families from people like you. You picked the wrong neighborhood and definitely the wrong family." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.